I find melodies when I'm running the boat and I'm running at a certain RPMs, and in one of the boats that I have, I hear rhythms, I hear melody, like in the hum of the motor, in the boat hitting the water, slapping the water. I mean, like, and it's around me. When I shut that engine off, I hear it in the wildlife. I hear it everywhere around me. So, I mean, like, it's always been, I don't know, to me, to help people understand it, it's where I feel the most peace. To help some people, for a lack of a better term, it's where I feel closest to God, is how some people would explain it.
Welcome to The Glorious Beard. A lot of people ask me what the podcast is really all about, and trying to explain it can sometimes leave a confused look on people's faces. It is a show about beards, yes, but it's so much more. It's about things like life, culture, the stories beneath the surface. And today, we have many for you. We're going to begin in Maryland with Neil Fallon, the frontman of the band Clutch. His voice is unmistakable, being part sermon and part storm, and so is his beard. We'll have a look at how his signature look has become part of his presence both on and off the stage. Then we'll go to New York City, where after nearly half a century, the New York Yankees have lifted their facial hair ban. What does that mean when one of baseball's most image-conscious franchises finally lets the beard back in? We'll get into that history and what has changed. And also in this show, we have an intimate and personal conversation with Chuck Ragan, the unmistakable voice behind hot water music, and a man just as at home on a riverbank as he is on the stage. He joins us to talk about fishing, fatherhood, his life as a musician and solo artist, and his new record, Love and Lore. That's all ahead, right here on The Glorious Beard.
When I, at one point, had a Twitter account, and I got followed by an account called Neil Fallon's Beard. And I was like, wow, that's like some next level Philip K. Dick stuff. Your phone has your part of your body's following you via your phone.
For almost 35 years, Germantown, Maryland's Clutch has given the world some of the best pure rock and roll possible. Mixing stoner metal and blues with a dab of funk and jam band noodling, Clutch has toured the world, unleashing their own distinct pure rock fury on a vast, dedicated fan base. And at the front of this monster is vocalist Neil Fallon and his absolutely god-tier beard.
Lobster bags attack the town again. Wrap all my things in aluminum.
In the early days, Neil was a clean-shaven, baby-faced frontman, writing lyrics drawn from folklore, science fiction, and politics, among other inspirations. The band started out as so many bands do, playing everywhere and anywhere and slowly building an audience. In these pre- and early internet days, living on the road was the way to get on the radar. No Instagram, no podcasts, no TikTok. Word of mouth ruled the day, and Clutch built their reputation on the strength of their amazing, no-frills, no BS live shows. As the years went on and the miles added up, Neil's facial hair became almost its own entity, inspiring more than a few fans to grow out their own glorious beards. Today, almost 35 years into their careers, you can still find Clutch on the road and putting out new music. Including live album releases, collections of rarities, and proper studio albums, they have released 26 albums or EPs.
Streets on fire. The mob goes wild, wild, wild. Streets on fire. The mob goes wild. 21 guns, box made of pine. Letter from the government, sealed and signed, delivered Federal Express on your mother's doorsteps. 21 guns, box made of pine. Letter from the government, sealed and signed, delivered Federal Express
We here at the Glorious Beard proudly rock out to the mighty band known simply as Clutch, and we celebrate Neil Fallon's absolutely glorious beard. I'm here on the bustling corner of 6th Avenue and 8th Street in Huntington, West Virginia, at a rather special place to the local music scene known as The Loud. But you see, there's a bit more to this live music venue and beer garden than what initially meets the eye. Once upon a time, this was known as the V Club, one of the longest standing venues in the tri state area and beloved by locals of Huntington. And unfortunately, like many other businesses, its doors were shuttered by the COVID-19 pandemic. But it wasn't long until the owners revamped the hotspot into what it is today, complete with a juiced up sound system and a multicolored mural painted by the wonderful artist J.W. Butts. In its own way, The Loud is a living example of community banding together to preserve what they love. I suppose it's fitting, given that I'm here today to see the legendary Chuck Ragan perform live. A little known fact about Chuck Ragan, you can actually draw a direct line from our name, the Glorious Beard, straight to him. You can imagine the giddiness I felt when he said how honored he was to be a piece of the puzzle. I was lucky enough to be given some of Chuck's time to sit down and talk with him about his life before his show. We got together in a small backstage room, one that's perhaps a little bit less glamorous than you'd expect. It's got scattered bits of storage laying around the room, a couple of bits of disposable dinnerware, and small appliances plugged in wherever there's room, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Its exposed brick and dull lighting give it a cozy and real feeling, a perfect place to have a chat with someone as down to earth as Chuck Ragan. Chuck's an easy person to talk to, and just like his music, he's an even easier person to connect with. It was staggering how it felt more like I was catching up with a distant relative rather than talking to a shining star of the folk rock genre. The story of Chuck Ragan begins like everyone else's, with a man and a woman falling in love.
Well, yeah, I'm still figuring out who I am. Probably always will be. I hope I'm always searching. But yeah, man, I mean, I grew up I was born in Texas. I moved around a lot. My pop was a professional golfer, and he was a very well known golfer in the late '50s all through the '60s. Played the tour for 14 years and was a Ryder Cup team player. And when he was having right before he had me, before he married my mom. He started slowing down on the tour, and he got saved. He turned to evangelism, and he met my mom around the same time. And my mom was already traveling in evangelism as a ventriloquist, and she had a pretty wild life, but in the sense that she all was DIY pretty much from the get-go. And it was the only thing she ever did her entire life. It was her only job. And she used to travel around, she in her early years go on Christian crusades and travel with uh, Billy Graham and, the Gaithers and Jerry Spencer, and going on a lot of these Christian crusades and different revivals all over. Um, and when she met my dad, he had slowed down on the tour, and yeah, they ended up in Texas, and that's where I was born.
It turns out that Chuck's father, Dave Ragan, has an impressive history of his own. During his 2 year stint with the Florida Gators golf team, he helped them win the first two SEC championships in team history in 1955 and again in 1956, and was recognized as an All American. Then, when he went professional in 1956, as Chuck noted, he won the PGA Tour 3 times and was a member of the 1963 Ryder Cup team. Similarly, his mother, Geraldine Reagan, was equally devoted to her own passion, spreading the gospel all around the country as a ventriloquist with her dummy or partner, Ricky. As she liked to put it, Ricky's favorite subject was girls, with a capital G, and he loved to flirt with or sing them songs. Chuck's father ended up getting back into the golfing scene, so a lot of Chuck's youth was spent hopping across a few different nesting places.
My mom was originally from Orange. She's a Cajun girl, but grew up in Basile, but she was born in Orange, Texas. And they kind of settled in outside of Houston, Pasadena. That's where I was born. But then around that same time, my dad started going back into golf and getting different club jobs or university jobs. So it moved our family around quite a bit in my younger years. And we went from Texas to Lilburn, Georgia, then up to Chattanooga, Tennessee. We were in Chattanooga for quite a few years. Then down to Lafayette, Louisiana, and then to Sarasota, Florida. And then when we landed in Sarasota, Florida, I lived in Florida for about 18 years at that point.
Chuck mentioned another destination after Sarasota, Gainesville, Florida, where he met his future bandmates in hot water music. He also couldn't help but muse on later moving across the country to pursue the love of his life, a Cali girl. But we'll get into that a bit later. Because it was across the American South that Chuck was able to recall his first kindlings for his love of music. Chuck credits the Cajun roots of his mother and her side of the family as the beginnings of when music swept him off his feet.
Like some of my earliest memories of music, just from earliest memories of falling in love with music, is coming from a Cajun family. My papa was an accordion player. That's my granddad on my mama's side. And some of my earliest memories, man, was just me and my brother, sitting on the floor watching him sit there play accordion, and mama would stand next to him and bang a tambourine on her knee, and they'd sing Cajun songs, French songs, Creole, and just fell in love with it, and that's the first time that I was enamored by music.
It's only fitting that Chuck's mother was a big influence on Chuck's love for music, given that she lived a similar lifestyle to the one that he lives now. It was heartwarming to hear him speak so endearingly about his mother traveling across the country, doing something that she believed in. Not really all that different from the career path that he never knew would lay ahead. But once in Florida, Chuck would credit another specific hobby for helping him to discover his appreciation for music: skateboarding. After a boom of skate culture in the early 70s, skateboarding quickly became a bit of a stigma to some after that. At the close of the 70s, for example, many states and lawyers viewed skateboarding as inherently dangerous, and they led widespread efforts to have skate parks bulldozed. Going into the 80s, skateboarding was seen as a rebellious and punkish activity, but for Chuck, it was a way he bonded with his friends, and in the process, he bonded with types of music he perhaps never would have experienced otherwise.
At a young age, I found skateboarding, and there you go. And I was introduced immediately to a swarm of music and just different ideas and headspace and just a completely different energy that kind of shocked me, scared me, excited me, all the feels, right? At whatever, 12 years old. And and it was the first time that I'd heard bands like Germs and GBH and Bad Brains and Beastie Boys and I mean Metallica,
Yeah.
and back then you know, all of it kind of somehow meshed together. You know, I mean, I have early memories of going over to my buddy Carl Richard's house where, and his pop used to build skateboard ramps. He was a carpenter, and we'd be out on the sidewalk in the street skateboarding, and we would have our tapes playing, and it was all those bands and then some that I mentioned. But then Carl's pop would say, "All right, boys, I'm putting on my music now." And he would put on some Cajun music, or he'd put on like old gospel, or his favorite was Creedence Clearwater Revival, right? So he'd put on CCR, and we didn't stop skateboarding, right? It kept going. So somewhere at an early age, music just became, it just crossed all sorts of genres and boundaries. And to me, it was just good music was good music. And, you know, if it made me feel good, if it moved me in some way or the other, I was all in.
Chuck credits this experience of passively listening to the music of Carl's father while skateboarding as the reason he loves music of all kinds. Songs of any genre, of any language. That's music that Chuck welcomes into his life unconditionally.
I mean, I listen to all kinds of stuff. You know, I love bluegrass. I love Cuban music. I love classical music, you know. I mean, it's so across the board, it's not even funny.
Yeah,
You know, if it makes me feel good, if it makes me think, you know, if it kind of inspires me in one way or the other, you know, it's, to me, it's worth diving into.
The more I talked to Chuck, the more it became really clear. Music is everywhere, and inspiration tends to be all around us. You just have to be diligent enough to hear it. Coming up after a short break, we'll take a look at another one of Chuck Ragan's passions and how it even connects to his passion for music. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Tell me later what you say, how we liberate some love. I got it all for you, nothing to lose, and left to prove this. Whoa.
Reggie Jackson. Long drive right field. Goodbye. A big World Series for Reggie Jackson.
Baseball is back. Hot dogs, take me out to the ball game, and full glorious beards. We see them all over the diamond. 29 major league teams let their players grow them. But there's one notable exception, the New York Yankees, or at least it was one. The Yankees recently reversed their long-standing policy of not allowing their players to grow beards this offseason. So then, what gives?
Their long-standing facial hair policy that has been in place since the 70s, they will now allow their players to maintain a well-groomed beard. Here's what Hal Steinbrenner had to say about the decision.
I did make the decision that the policy that was in place was outdated.
Let's back up a bit. Where and when did this policy begin? Well, that goes all the way back to old George Steinbrenner. He purchased the Yankees in the 1970s, and that's when he promptly banned his players from growing their facial hair. But you may be asking why. Well, it actually goes into something that we like to call the politics of respectability. So then, what is the politics of respectability? The politics of respectability is an age-old idea that says that members of a marginalized community will consciously abandon or punish controversial aspects of their cultural political identity as a method of assimilating. In other words, the idea that certain things that someone does that are controversial should be avoided, and people should follow the ways of a society in order to be properly respected.
This is the time for the beards.
Says Frank Rosato, who's getting his beard trimmed at Jordan Barbershop near Yankee Stadium, which has had several of its players come in for a buzz at both locations. After 49 years, the baseball team officially announced it's allowing their players to grow out their facial hair.
The vast majority of 20s, 30s, into the 40s men in this country have beards.
There's been so much change in the game I think this is a little bit of an evolution and a nudge on our part.
It may be a silly notion, and in this case, it's the idea that somehow a beard is going to make the players for America's team less respectable, and it keeps them from representing the team in the way that old George wanted. So he stopped the age-old ability for the men on his team to grow out their beards.
It was one of the most famous or infamous policies in the world of sports for nearly a half century. Now it's set to go the way of New Coke and the Chevy Chase show. The New York Yankees are reversing the long-standing ban on facial hair. The team announced that players would be allowed to grow well-groomed beards. Owner George Steinbrenner implemented the rule in 1976, although mustaches were still allowed.
Now, there were a lot of issues that occurred because of politics like this over the years. Raleigh Fingers, infamously known for his handlebar mustache, retired rather than play without his facial hair because he didn't want to shave and change his signature look. In fact, several players have actually avoided going to New York over the years because of the policy forcing the Steinbrenner family to find extra money to convince them.
God bless you, Jerry. But this is what you're going to do for me. You listen, Jerry?
Yeah, what can I do for you, Rod? You just tell me, what can I do for you?
It's a very personal, very important thing. Hell, it's a family motto. Are you ready, Jerry?
I'm ready.
Just want to make sure you're ready, brother. Here it is. Show me the money.
For the most part, the policy that old George put into place led to a successful run for New York baseball. The Yankees enjoyed a quite successful run for around 20 years during the time of the beardless Yankees. The 1990s in particular saw 3 World Series title runs. However, all good things have to come to an end.
Where the Yanks just melted down. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever quite seen an inning like this, especially in a World Series or postseason game. Look, the Yankees made some mistakes. You can't make mistakes against a team like the Los Angeles Dodgers.
The fact of the matter is that the Yankees have not won a World Series in 16 years. Recent years have seen very little success in the way that the Yankees and their fans are used to. George Steinbrenner, one of the most polarizing figures in all of sports, passed away and left the team to his children. And a team that made at least one World Series run in nearly every decade for a century has gone 16 years since their last World Series title. With limited success, changes are inevitable. The Yankees this offseason have finally made the decision to allow facial hair on their players, closing the window on nearly 50 years of clean-shaven faces.
Right now, beard, 22-year-old grown man, but I'm going to shave this beard, and then I'm going to look like I'm a 15-year-old boy.
After all these years, the New York Yankees have reversed the policy that defined the George Steinbrenner era in New York. But perhaps they're just trying to exorcise the demons of 15 years of regular season and playoff losses. And while the policy change may not be fully understood, what can be said here at the Glorious Beard is finally, and welcome to the 21st century New York Yankees.
Welcome back to the Glorious Beard. When we last left off with Chuck Ragan, we talked a bit about how his mother's Cajun traditions and skateboarding lit the fire that was his passion for music. But fans of Chuck Ragan may know something that perhaps could come as a shock to those who are a bit newer to the scene. Chuck Ragan is actually a licensed guide and runs guided fly fishing tours across California. Fishing has always been a large part of Chuck's life, which was certainly helped by Chuck's father inadvertently landing them around prime fishing spots whenever they moved. And with his mother being born to a fishing family, that tradition continued onward. Even aside from his parents, Chuck and his brother had spent a lot of time fishing alongside their grandparents in places like Daytona Beach and Holly Beach. It's easy to see that fishing for the Ragan family was a way of life.
Fishing has just been ingrained in me since I was a kid. I mean, like, everybody in my family fished. Didn't matter if you were a male or a female. It did not matter. Everybody fished. Everybody cooked. you know. And growing up, I mean, we were all just strictly meat fishermen, you know. I can't even say it was, I mean, yeah, we went for fun at times, but I mean, we went to eat. And that's just the way it always was. And and then as I grew a little bit older, you know, I always loved to fish. And then, you know, next thing I know, I'm taking friends fishing that had never fished before, and they're using my stuff, and I'm taking them to the spot, and I'm showing them how to get them. And, you know, that was just part of, you know, back then fishing wasn't all that cool to most people, especially in a punk rock scene. You know, it wasn't. And to me, it was just, it's what we did, you know, whenever we could.
In a way, Chuck Ragan's increasing career in music and especially his time touring was a boon to his love for fishing. Being able to travel across the globe, now with a fishing rod at his side, he got to live in and connect with nature in a way many people can only dream of. It's actually a known thing in the music circles that Chuck runs in that if you were touring with Chuck Ragan, then you were going fishing. While Chuck grew up bait fishing, a style that involves having to catch your own bait and work your way up to progressively bigger fish, fly fishing was something that his brother introduced him to later in life. For those of you who aren't quite caught up on the expansive lore of fishing, fly fishing is a technique that involves specialized equipment that aims to mimic an insect landing on the surface of the water rather than using bait. It's an art form, and it requires precision in its casting to mimic insects and a deep understanding of the behavior of the fish that you're trying to catch. But its reward of a deeper connection to the natural environment around you makes it all the more worth it. So it makes perfect sense that this caught Chuck Ragan. But even still, there's always been an allure about bait fishing to Chuck. Not only does it sort of give you an excuse to fish more in order to catch more bait, but it also has a natural feel to it that emulates a piece of the old world.
Fly fishing came in way later in my life. You know, I've only been fly fishing for maybe a little over 20 years. You know, a little over 20 years ago, my brother Paul was living in Denver at the time, and uh, he sent me one day in the mail. He sent me a crummy little fishing reel, fly reel, and a fly rod, and a shoebox full of material and a vise. And he was just like, man, and he was raving about tying his own flies and then going and catching fish on them. And he was like, oh, it's just different. It's different because when we grew up, I mean, we went from early on starting out fishing bait, fishing cut bait, fishing live bait, just bare bones, you know, catching bait, go catch the little fish, catch a big fish. And then, you know, it got into fishing artificials, you know, and whatnot. And then somewhere like in my early adulthood, I actually kind of turned away and didn't want anything artificial. I went back, I wanted to go back to just that hunter gatherer, just we got to catch the little fish to go catch the big fish. And, and, and it was like two fishing trips in one, you know, like, and if you didn't catch bait, guess what?
Catch the big ones.
That's right. So it would always push you to, you know, find that bait. And like I got just as much enjoyment out of that, you know, as finding that bait.
As mentioned before, though, Chuck Ragan would find himself moving yet again much later in his life to Los Angeles, California. It's certainly a much bigger city than he had ever lived in before. And though he had been there before on various tours and such, he never felt that it was an environment he would want to live in. In fact, he remarked that it was the last place he thought he would ever live. But his love for his wife Jill was stronger than his disdain for the restless city of LA. Fortunately, things would be a bit more Chuck's speed when they relocated 400 miles up north to Grass Valley, California. While Grass Valley's population of 12,000 at the time is still quite the increase over Micanopy, Florida's population, it's still much more comfortable than Los Angeles's staggering 3.7 million. It was in this fishing-rich area that Chuck was able to take his love of fly fishing to the next level when he was encouraged by several peers to begin guiding for the nonprofit organization Cast Hope.
And then when we moved to when I moved to California, I moved to probably my least favorite place on the planet because the girl that I loved was there, which was Los Angeles, which is crazy to me that I went from a population, Micanopy, Florida, population was 320 to the heart of Los Angeles. And and I mean I've toured there, but I was only there for, a day. And I'm like, okay, not for me. But my girl was there for work and I loved her that much that I moved to my least favorite. Love makes you do funny things. So yeah, I went there and I would dabble in the fly fishing stuff, but it wasn't until I moved to the foothills, where we are now, in Nevada County, where I was just surrounded by it. There I was seeing people in the river and I'm going, oh, okay, there's a thing to this. And I dove in super deep and just went in pedal down from the get-go.
For Chuck, not only is nature a source of liberation from the distractions of the technological world, but it's also a source of inspiration for his music. Being away from the loud bustle of the city and into the serenity of the natural world is where Chuck feels the most clarity. He distinctly reflects on the problem solving nature of fishing and exploring the outdoors, and how it's reflective of the reality that we all face. Suddenly, intangible objects in life, like maintaining yourself and your values in a larger than life city, become fighting against the pull of a river's current, and dodging potential pitfalls along the way become rocks and log jams in the path ahead of your fishing boat. These metaphors, and the sounds all around him, like the lapping of the water or the hum of a boat's motor, are the beating heart that lies at the center of Chuck Ragan's incredible music.
Clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clarity.
Absolutely. That's where I feel most at peace. That's where I kind of reconnect, where I find a lot of answers and paths over or around obstacles, so to speak. And part of it is maybe because that's also what I'm doing literally, when I'm running the jet boats or up or down the river, and veering away from rocks and obstructions and log jams and this and that. Or if I'm drifting down the river, in the drift boat and I got these currents pulling me towards danger zones, it's, that's how you have to think in the most literal sense is like, I need to overcome these obstacles here, and I get a ton of inspiration. A lot of lyrics happen out there. A lot of melodies happen out there. I I I I find melodies when I'm running the boat and and I'm running at a certain RPMs and in one of the boats that I have, there's just I hear rhythms, I hear melody like in the hum of the motor, in the boat hitting the water, slapping the water. It's around me. When I shut that engine off, I hear it in the wildlife. I hear it everywhere around me. So it's always been, you know, I don't know, to me, to help people understand it, it's where I feel the most peace. To help some people, for a lack of a better term, it's where I feel closest to God, is how some people would explain it.
Turning his love for fishing and the real world, as Chuck happily refers to it as, into a full-fledged guided tour business is certainly not as easy or effortless as he makes it look. It may be surprising to some for those of us who aren't as experienced in the fields as Chuck, but he can draw a lot of parallels between his career as a musician and a professional guide. He compares the actual process of leading expeditions on boats to being on stage as a musician, the fun part. But he also gives us some insight into the extensive work that goes on behind the scenes of both of these jobs. For example, every single guided fishing tour, there's countless hours of motor maintenance, scheduling, paperwork, and inventory management that never crosses the mind of most people unfamiliar with the intricacies of the business. In the same sense, being a touring musician has its challenges as well. You also have equipment to maintain there. You have to take time to find and book locations to perform at, and you constantly have to be networking with those around you. But I get the sense that Chuck sees it all as worth it when he gets to see the smiles of people listening to music or seeing their fishing rod bend from a fish's bite.
I mean, the fishing, so the fly fishing business that I run back home, it's a great business. And it's funny because it's in so many ways it's no different than what I'm doing here. Like I'm an independent contractor more or less, right? Guide work, running fishing charters is hired skilled labor. That's all it is. And what reminds me of this business is like the fishing, much like being on that stage tonight. That's the easy part. It's everything that had to happen and everything that, you know, had to take place to get there and to make it work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In the guide business, it's the truck and the boats and the motor maintenance and just, you know, uh licensing and permits and insurance and this and that, the scheduling, the networking, the whole business aspect of it, all the gear management, the restocking and cleaning and everything. That's the job. That's the job of it.
The fishing is the fun part. Being on stage is the fun part.
That's right. It's making sure everything is dialed where my clients are safe and, I have their lives in my hands, so making sure everybody's safe and send them away with the best memory possible. Like, that's the easy part. It's no different than stepping on stage, and making sure your guitar ain't broken and, everything's working and you made it in one piece in a reliable vehicle, and you flew on time, and you know what I mean? That's the job, is making everything happen to get here.
Responsibilities of the jobs, both fly fishing and his music, are something that Chuck thinks deeply of. Coming up after a short break, we'll hear Chuck talk a bit more about the challenges of life on the road and being away from his home and family. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Never dreamed I'd lose all control. I never dreamed I'd be breathing this long. Heaven help me, I'm falling apart. Dead drift from a reckless car.
Just thought over the years of how incredibly lucky and blessed I feel to have somehow ended up at the right place at the right time to meet the folks that helped steer me into a music community like this. It's changed my life for the better.
For 30 plus years, Chuck Ragan has been blessing the world with his amazing music. Whether it's his work in post-hardcore punk rock band Hot Water Music, Sawdust on the Floor rabble-rousing with the vastly underrated Rumble Seat project, or his involvement in the Revival Tour with fellow punk Americana-influenced artists like Tim Barry, Ben Nichols, and John Snodgrass. Chuck has found a way to drop gems that appeal to punk kids, old hardcore dudes, Americana fans, and all points in between. Whether you're an old schooler who ditched the band shirts for flannel button-downs, or a younger fan, or maybe you just have Chuck Ragan or any of his projects in your heavy rotation, there's a great chance that you already have this album in your rotation. Now, for the first time in more than a decade, Chuck Ragan has blessed the world with his latest solo album, Love and Lore. Ragan's fifth solo record finds him at the top of his game and wearing his punk and Americana influences on his sleeve like a well-worn patch stitched to your favorite denim jacket. The album opens with All In, a banger of a track built on haunting guitar tones and Chuck's signature raspy vocals. And it sets the tone for the rest of the audio experience he's about to take you on. Another standout track is Northern World, flexing some Bruce Springsteen-esque storytelling while staying loyal to Chuck's tried and true sound. It might just be the track you find yourself coming back to the most on the record.
I was welling up inside, broken in half out the girl that shocked my soul and lit my head ablaze.
Love and Lore feels like the culmination of 30 years of living in the music world. 30 years going from town to town in a small cramped van, playing shows in dank smoky dive joints, and evolving to riding in buses and playing bigger venues to larger crowds. Through sheer hard work and unflinching determination, all without sacrificing an ounce of the honesty, sincerity, and DIY mentality that makes him great. In a music world where people have a tendency to fake their way to authenticity, Chuck Ragan stays true to himself until the final note rings out. An inspiration to countless people, whether through his music or his facial hair, most artists wait their entire careers to create something as genuine and reflective as this album. But in Chuck's case, Love and Lore is just the latest in a giant catalog of real, from the heart, and authentic music. It serves as a tremendous addition to his career output, and would make a fantastic complement to your music collection or listening rotation. He's had a monumental career, a life well lived, and of course, for the better part of all that time, he's had one hell of a glorious beard. We here at The Glorious Beard celebrate and recommend Chuck Ragan's latest release, Love and Lore, and give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. More about Chuck Ragan and his music can be found at chuckraganmusic.com.
Welcome back. As fans of their work, it can often be easy to forget that musicians, performers, and people with careers displaying their incredible talents like Chuck Ragan are actually just like us. They have responsibilities, homes, and families that they would often really like to be around. They're just dudes, is how one of my best friends who works in the music industry likes to put it. The difference between most people and people like Chuck Ragan, however, is that we're not traveling across the country on long tours that keep us away for extended periods of time. With a wife and kid at home, Chuck gave us some insight on how challenging he felt it was to balance the two lives of traveling performer Chuck Ragan and a father who needs to be there for his family. Combine that with a lively property meant to emulate the natural world that he loves so much, distance from home is a chronic battle that Chuck faces. But even still, something that's always at the forefront of his mind is his love for music, his gratitude to his fans, and the need to speak from the heart in the form of his songs.
Yeah, that's the real struggle. It really is. It's a serious inner battle that goes on in me every day. I got a boy at home. He's going to be 10 years old soon. He needs me.
Yeah.
I have a wife who is absolutely incredible and just the hardest working, best mama to our son that I could ever dream of, you know, and she needs me. And, we've kind of positioned ourselves where, we live on a little property that needs a lot of work. And, when we're more, I mean, it takes a lot to when you have acres and we have a pond and we're growing fish and we fruit trees and this and that. And it's not really designed for somebody to be gone all the time. And if I'm gone too long, it means I gotta, hire some folks to come maintain some stuff while I'm gone. Um, yeah, it's a tough kind of fine line to dance between because yeah, I've spent over half of my life building a career, more or less. And also know and respect the fact that, you know, people have gravitated to some of this music and it has made a difference in some people's lives. And I respect that and I'm honored that it's a part of that I'm a piece of that puzzle. But at the same time, I don't feel like I owe anybody anything, but I also feel like there is something in me that still gets joy and also needs to get this stuff off of my chest, and release it.
In addition, another challenge that lies behind the scenes of some of our favorite artists is security. Artists just like us gain an increased amount of responsibilities as they get older. They have to consider how they're going to make their mortgage payments, how and where they're going to put their children in school, and how they're going to pay for the various insurances that are a necessity in our everyday lives. Chuck talked briefly about the challenge of meeting those responsibilities as what is essentially an independent contractor, as he remarked earlier. Something that stuck out to me when hearing Chuck talk about security is how much he views it as a treasure. Just like everything in life worth fighting for, security is something to hold on tight to nurture, and to never take for granted.
You fast forward to doing it as long as we have where, you're I mean, we all started when we were in our late teens and early 20s, and I'm 50 now. And, you don't think about all the responsibilities when you're in those younger
Yeah.
years, right? And you don't think about the fact that, like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to, that means it's got to pay a mortgage, it's got to put my boy in school, it's got to pay for, our insurance and this and that and the other thing. And it can be a heavy load at times because for people like us, we're not punching a clock. We're independent workers.
Yeah.
So there's very, very little security in what we're doing. If you want security, you got to hunt it. You got to go get it. And when you find it, you got to grab onto it and nurture it and hang on to it as long as you can.
Because our name is the Glorious Beard, after all, I couldn't help but ask about his glorious beard that he's had throughout his entire musical career and serves as the namesake for this very podcast that you're listening to today. But like many great things in life, the beard didn't have too much thought behind it, according to Chuck. Turns out the wonderful story behind the beard is really rather simple. Time on the road and touring across the country, touring across the globe, makes shaving a bit of an inconvenience, and it's just easier to let it grow. While it may not be the fantastical answer some were hoping for, to me, it feels perfect that Chuck Ragan's beard, just like Chuck Ragan's music, and even Chuck himself, stems from everyday life. The last question I asked Chuck was what he had planned next on the docket, and he expressed a hope to get back to writing some new music soon after a long touring season.
Honestly, I'm looking forward to working on some new music sometime soon. I mean, I've been really lucky to just be around some amazing folks and songwriters. I've been touring a lot and with Hot Water and with my stuff. And I notice, and I've always noticed this over the years, that anytime I do a lot of running like I've been doing, uh not a whole lot of writing happens on the road. Like things get started, but there's not a lot of time to really hone it. Every once in a while, something falls out, and it's just in, you know, an hour. It's just bang, 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 and it's just there. And, that kind of happens rarely. But what happens more often than not is just little bits and pieces kind of, and I record stuff or write stuff down and then the real challenge is like kind of filtering through all that stuff and, laying it down and focusing on it and seeing what I have, seeing what's worth working on. But I've noticed over the years that it always happens in the breaks between a lot of touring.
The visual that Chuck used to describe his working process was that of a well. He described going to that well, taking all of the water out of it little by little to keep working harder and pressing on with several spinning plates that he has going. But the valuable little time in between these tours and in between the guided fishing trips is the time to allow that well to settle and to refill. It's hard to imagine a man as busy as Chuck Ragan settling down for long, but it's the moments in between that he's learned to embrace the value of, a growth to the Chuck Ragan of many years ago. The Chuck Ragan that we're blessed with now made one thing clear. He's all about living in the moment, and he gave that as the main thing he wanted to focus on next.
The calendar fills up real quick. So to make all of this work, everything I'm doing right now was planned last year, and unfortunately that has to happen. But the downside of that is then I'm just kind of stuck in a agenda.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So it's regimented and you kind of got to stick to it.
100%. And there's pros and cons to it, going back to what we were talking about earlier about having very little job security and having to go hunt it. That's how you do it. You plan a year, year and a half, 2 years, 5 years ahead of time. Seriously, where you can't plan far enough ahead.
Yeah.
But especially when for guys like us because I'll put it to you this way, to put out a record and to tour on that record, that's like a 2.5 to 3 year block of your life, from writing to demos to pre-production to recording to build up, right? Yeah. To the release of the record to touring on that record and in all the regions that we visit.
Yeah.
Right? That's like 3 years.
Yeah.
What I mean?
It's a constant cycle.
Right. So if you're kind of really trying to lay out your plan and build that job security, that's the best way you can do it, but at the same time, the downside of it is it can kind of distract us, distract me from living in the moment sometimes and really slowing down enough to go, man, this is awesome. I'm enjoying this. This is great. This is what we worked for. We planned this after all last year, right? And now we're here, and that's what I need to focus on rather than, okay, I need to think about next year.
As our time chatting grew to a close and showtime drew near, Chuck was kind enough to take some quick pictures and autograph a copy of his book, The Road Most Traveled, for me. And for the rest of the night and many nights since, I couldn't help but reflect on how down-to-earth and easy to talk to Chuck Ragan was. An open book, one that was willing and eager to give me a peek into all aspects of his life and the priceless insights that he had to offer. I read an article in the days leading up to this show about how everyone had a Chuck Ragan story, and the author proceeded to tell theirs about the time that Chuck literally gave them the shoes off of his feet backstage after a show. And while my Chuck Ragan story isn't nearly as cool as that, it's still really cool, I think. And it is stories like that, and my own experience with Chuck, that lead me to one inarguable conclusion. Whoever came up with the phrase, "Don't meet your heroes," must have never met Chuck Ragan.
I can't stand feeling the dead. I can't stand feeling old. I can't stand standing when nothing is standing up there. All I know.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Glorious Beard podcast. I really hope that you've enjoyed it, and a special thanks to our guest, Chuck Ragan. His new album, Love and Lore, is available everywhere that great music is sold. Our production director at JXB Media is Bob McCoy. Our executive producers for this episode were Josh Exline and Joseph Kay. Our associate producers were Damian Miller and Sabrina Dene. Production assistance on this episode was done by Hunter Exline. The words that came to life on this episode exist because of the incredible people like Nathan Richards, Joseph Kay, Josh Exline, and Bob McCoy. Major recognition, as always, goes to Brielle Tiger, who works behind the scenes turning our audio into visual excellence for our YouTube channel. You can see some of it by searching The Glorious Beard. And of course, our social media team, who each and every day pushes out fantastic content on our Instagram. They're led by the amazing Sabrina Dene, and you can see their great work on our Instagram by searching The Glorious Beard. This episode only sounds amazing because of people like Caitlin Moldovan, Anna the Quacken, Natalia Toledo Rodriguez, and Bob McCoy, all of whom worked in the editing room. The honey-dripped voices that you heard in your ear came courtesy of TJ Grau, Josh Exline, and Bob McCoy. The Glorious Beard is a production of JXB Media, a subsidiary of Top Secret Television Productions. Be sure to like and share, subscribe, follow, whatever other fun stuff that your podcast platform provides for you to do. And also, find us online at thegloriousbeard.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.